Iprigin looked over his datapad while he waited by the holographic communication sphere to be ready to give his report to Thrazin High Command. He once again inspected his uniform to make sure he was within regulations. As the communication sphere flickered to life, he snapped to attention and saluted the Supreme Commander, the 5 Grand Admirals, and the 5 Grand Strategos of the Army seated around the table. Inquisitor Iprigin, Senior Intelligence Officer, Rannick Sector Command, reporting as ordered, doing his best not to show just how nervous he was presenting a report before the High Command of the Thrazin Empire. "Be seated, Inquisitor," rumbled the voice of the Supreme Commander over the holographic sphere's audio device. "Yes, sir," Iprigin replied, taking a seat in front of the sphere. The Supreme Commander said, "We called this meeting to discuss an intel report sent by you and flagged high priority. There are some on the Council that doubt the veracity of this report." Grand Admiral Ippilon spoke up. "Do not take this as a slight on your abilities, Inquisitor Iprigin, but the High Command needs to clarify this report. We did not think it possible for the humans to field the numbers that you reported." The Grand Admiral continued, "If these numbers are accurate, then it will require shifting a significant portion of the fleets and army units." The Supreme Commander spoke up again. "We have also had reports of a buildup in the Terek system, but much smaller than the one in your report. Explain how this intel was gathered and give an updated report on the human activity in the HFY Sumact system." "I hear and obey, Supreme Commander," Iprigin replied. "For the past 3 parlaks, we'd begun to pick up a decrease in the usual communications and ship traffic into the system. We ran diagnostics on our equipment and found no issues," Iprigin began. "It might not sound like much, but the source of the missing signals caught our attention." Iprigin paused to bring up an image in the holosphere before continuing. "This is a graph showing the sources of the signals we monitor. If you look at the last source, it's the radiation signature given off by the reactors on the civilian mining outpost. We use that signature as a baseline for the radiation output and natural signals given off by the system's star and orbiting bodies." Iprigin explained, "If we seem to get a spike that indicates increased activities by the humans, we can check against the baseline to see if the signals are just being magnified by stellar or background activity." Iprigin pointed to the time frame that coincided with 3 parlaks ago. "The radiation signatures spike and then begin to fade until they are gone. Checking against the other part of the baseline showed no stellar activity to cause that." Grandy. Strategos Ticklus asked, "Couldn't they have just shut down the reactors or had an accident?" Iprigin brought up another image. "Humans' energy sources are far inferior to our own and give off more signatures than our own. This graph shows the shutdown of the reactors in the Eclarian system just prior to our invasion. They were trying to evacuate all their assets before we arrived. As I said, their energy sources are inferior to ours and take 5x the amount of time to shut down." Iprigin brought up another graph. "This shows the signature for a reactor we destroyed when we invaded the Neeg system. There was a massive burst of radiation at the moment of destruction. Neither of those shows up in our monitoring of the Sumact system." Iprigin points to the spike of the radiation signatures. "These match previous readings of new reactors being brought online. Either the humans made a massive technological jump to improve their reactors, or they were masking the signal somehow. It was only a few rotations before we noticed some of our intelligence assets, both living beings and electronics, started going dark. This was enough to pique our curiosity, and we sent some of our cloaked reconnaissance probes to the system. We thought it was lost because we weren't getting any signals back and sent another one. So we sent a third but gave it orders to return after 1 rotation of the planet the humans occupied. After the probe left the system, we started getting information back. The other 2 probes were still active but unable to transmit out of the system. Humans have found a way to block all artificial signals from leaving the system. Even our communications between our probes were restricted inside the system. That also explains our assets going dark. But we didn't know why they did this. So we sent the probe back to get close enough to change the orders of the other 2 probes to leave the system at preset times and transmit their data. Iprigin changed the image to one of the Sumact system and the probe locations were marked. We snuck one of the probes close enough to begin receiving information from our assets on the station. The next intel dump is when we received reports of the increased human activity and new construction on several habitable moons. It also provided the initial intel on the gathering fleet. At first, it was only a dozen warships, 3 capitals, and their support ships. But dozens were arriving over each parlac. One of my remaining assets on the station also reported large numbers of ground forces arriving and then being flown to one of the new bases. So far, it has counted the insignia of no less than 8 divisions, to use the human term. Previous intelligence. Reports have listed a human division to be 25,000 soldiers. Ipragan switched to a new screen. We received another probe signal before this meeting with updated information. We estimate the human fleet to be over 1,500 warships and several hundred other types of ships, mostly troop transports. Over 500 are capital ships. Ipragan checked his pad again before continuing. We've counted 5 supercarriers, 100 standard carriers, 200 battleship class, and about 200 of their heavy cruisers. The rest of the fleet is a mix of subcapitals that humans classify as light cruisers, frigates, destroyers, and corvettes. Our current estimate has 1 supercarrier containing 500 strike craft, and carriers carry up to 150. The best estimate is 1,700 strike aircraft, but we do not know how many are for space combat, and if any are assigned for planetary support of the ground forces. The asset also updated human ground force numbers. 3 more divisions have arrived, 1 artillery, 1 of armored vehicles, and 1 mech. We do not know their actual strength. Current total number of ground forces is at least 200,000 troops. The members of the High Council looked alarmed. The Supreme Commander asked, "Do you have an idea of their target?" We picked up increased reconnaissance activity in the balloon system, Ipragan replied. He continued, "Our asset also picked up bits and pieces of information to support that system." Balloon system? That makes no sense. It has no strategic value. One of the Grand Strategos exclaimed. He was a recent addition to the High Council, and Ipragan had forgotten his name. Before Ipragan could reply, Grand Admiral Ipalan answered, "Not by itself, but it makes a good stepping-off point to other systems that would make effective staging grounds to then hit 7 significant worlds, both militarily and industrial." At this revelation, most of the members of the High Command looked either concerned or alarmed. "And what about the Terek system buildup?" the Supreme Commander asked. After consulting with the intel staff, monitoring the Terek system, we believe it's a distraction to keep our forces in that area. Discussion with my superiors came to the same result. Ipragan replied, "And why does the intelligence come to this conclusion?" Grand Admiral Ipalan asked. Ipragan changed the image in the globe to show scans of the Terek system. The naval and army forces are much smaller, maybe 150 ships of all types near the 4th planet's starbase. That includes troop transports. Ipragan continued, "Their attempts at preventing our reconnaissance of the system is not as good as it's been in the past. We think they want us to see them. They are dangling a force dangerous enough to take the Jokrant system, but not against the forces we have in the system, and our fleets and armies in the area. But the human force building in the Sumacht system outnumbers our total force in that sector 4x times over." Ipragan finished. Ipragan waited quietly as the High Command deliberated. Supreme Commander addressed Ipragan. "Normally, someone of your security level wouldn't be informed of these plans ahead of time, but we've determined this situation requires immediate updates on the intel, so you and only you will report directly to us, not through your superiors first. We are going to transfer the 1st, 3rd, and 8th fleets from the Jokrant system and the Lankardi systems to the Sumacht system. The 2 more fleets will come from a more secure sector of the Empire. The 5 of the 6 army groups in the Jokrant system will be relocated as well," Admiral Ipalan spoke up. "We will be taking an indirect route to avoid detection. Besides monitoring the human buildup and notifying us when their offensive commences, you are to also look for any sign of detection of these movements." The next few rotations were a busy time for Ipragan, updating the latest intel on the human buildup and ensuring the movement of Thrazin forces wasn't detected. After discussions with High Command about the human forces attacking the Jakrant system, it was determined to be part of their misdirection ploy. Therefore, no reinforcements were sent there. Even after the Jakrant system fell, even the destruction of the Fifth Fleet, along with the army guarding it, the High Command still waited and fortified the Sumact system. And then one rotation, the forces in the Sumact system just vanished. All the humans and assets were gone and the system was empty. It was also rigged to explode after Thrazan forces entered the station. 2 ships and 383 ground troops were killed. All other human structures exploded right after that. The High Command assumed the humans discovered the forces waiting for them and withdrew entirely to avoid a Thrazan force counterattack. Iprigin was promoted for his actions during that period. They congratulated him for helping prevent the human offensive from succeeding with his work. It was 3 revolutions of Thrazan Prime later that Iprigin was captured by the humans when the Ronic sector fell. As a high-value prisoner, he was taken to the human homeworld for imprisonment and frequent interrogation. He assumed humans used tactics in interrogation as brutal as Thrazan interrogators did. After minimal resistance, he began freely answering their questions. It was after they'd been going over all his communications with Thrazan High Command, over his career, that he decided to risk asking the question that had bothered him since the humans abandoned the Sumact system. "May I ask a question, Colonel Adams?" Iprigin requested. "You may," the colonel replied. "Thank you. 4. Of what you call years ago, your invasion forces in the Sumact system just disappeared within a matter of days." The colonel replied, "Yes, I remember the operation." "Where did they go? We never saw some of the divisions our spy reported in action after that, and we didn't come across a buildup in other areas that matched the number of ships," Iprigin asked. The colonel looked at his comrade. "Not like he's going to escape and tell his buddies, right?" The lieutenant colonel replied, "No, I think it's safe to tell him, and we've been dying to brag about it to people outside the know." The colonel returned his attention to Iprigin. With a grin, Colonel Adams replied, "They never existed, or at least most of them." Iprigin was confused and asked, "What do you mean?" The lieutenant colonel spoke up. "We took a page from a major conflict on Earth before we ever put a human in space." He continued, "They used deception to pin down enemy forces at the wrong location and keep from defending against the true invasion force. They even thought the true invasion was a feint, just like you did." Iprigin looked horrified. "But I saw the images of all the ships myself, and my assets saw the unit patches." Colonel Adams laughed again before speaking. The ships were either empty hulls with only some having engines so you'd see them arrive. Others were disguised civilian ships that also brought in disassembled parts to build more fake warships. "And the troops?" Iprigin asked. The lieutenant colonel replied, "Oh, that was only a couple of companies of non-combat personnel. We knew about your spy, and Yakiri have always been horrible at telling humans they don't know apart. It was just the same 300 troops changing uniforms or division patches and boarding the station again. The actual unit never had any patches or identifying marks. We were just designated the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops after the original unit that handled the deception." "Fake? I was fooled by you." Iprigin replied, "My entire career was built on a lie and I never figured it out." Colonel Adams replied, "It's probably better you didn't, or they might have imprisoned you." Looking miserable, Iprigin replied, "I would have probably been executed." With that realization, he was suddenly very glad he never found out, and that he was a prisoner of the humans if High Command ever did find out. Looking at the 2 humans, "You humans are sneaky bastards," Iprigin accused at the same time. They both said, "Thank you," as if it was a compliment. Enjoy another story. Dr. Suriella walked down the hallway, gesturing animatedly as she talked. As the attending physician, one of her duties was working with that year's med students. Today was the first day of this year's crop of hopefuls. As always, Dr. Suriella started with a tour of the hospital facilities. The medical station wasn't as fancy as those in the Federation's inner systems of the Federation. Still, its location in Zada space made it the closest Type 1 trauma center to the war zone. It wasn't a posting for a medical student who wanted to just coast through their residency. Many broke at the stress put on them by the large number of casualties that even a small battle could bring in. It was very much a sink-or-swim kind of hospital. Any med student who survived their rotation here, a Zahatine raider almost made that a literal event, had no problem getting a position on a warship or other trauma center. The group had just finished touring the trauma intake facility. This station has 25 trauma rooms just like the one I showed you. Dr. Suriella stated, on the slower days, they might handle most cases from when a patient first arrives until they are moved to another area of the hospital. Dr. Suriella stopped and turned to face the student. But when we get wounded from an accident or battle, they stabilize the patient and send them to surgery to finish the job. Once patients are fit to travel, they are immediately sent on one of the hospital transfer ships to other facilities to finish treatment and recovery. This allows us to treat more patients faster, with fewer patients lost while awaiting treatment. Dr. Suriella's voice took on a note of pride. Following the Battle of Geridian IV, we treated 250,000 casualties in 48 hours with a 98% survival rate. The doctor's eyes took on a faraway look, remembering that chaotic day. The smells of blood, shit, and burnt flesh permeated her old lab coat so much that she had to throw it out. The cries of the wounded in a dozen languages, and the ominously still forms that had to be stacked in one of the hangar bays to make room for the next batch of wounded. It was 48 hours of barely contained chaos, and almost the entire staff dropped where they stood, as the last patients were evacuated to other medical facilities. That event led to all 3,500 station personnel receiving a commendation in their file. Dr. Suriella? Are you okay? One of the med students asked. I'm sorry, I was lost in a memory, she replied, embarrassed at her loss of focus. They passed through a set of doors and down a long corridor with psychiatric patient rooms, currently empty, on both sides until they came to a door that needed a code to open. Med students don't get the code to this door. You are only allowed in if a senior physician accompanies you or one of the guards. She nodded to the 3 massive Yogath at the desk. Escorts you in at a senior physician's request. She always enjoyed the slightly worried look that came over a new student's face when she gave that speech. Student physicians often had an exaggerated sense of their abilities at first, and they needed a reminder that even a medical facility could be dangerous. Dr. Suriella, why is that area restricted? One of the students asked. This is the human psychiatric treatment area, or as my human colleagues call it, the psych ward, Suriella replied. All the med students began to chatter at once. If there were humans behind that door, then it was very dangerous. A healthy human was extremely dangerous in a fight, so just how much worse was one with mental problems? Dr. Suriella led the students down the hallway until they came to a desk with a human doctor and 2 more Yogath orderlies. Being a ward for humans, it explained why Yogath was at the door and inside. They were big enough to have at least a chance to detain an out-of-control human. Dr. Suriella addressed the human. Dr. Saunders, how are you today? Dr. Saunders looked up. Well, hello there, Dr. Suriella. I'm doing well, and it's been a quiet day. He then scanned the faces of the med students before saying, Fresh meat for the grinder? Dr. Suriella laughed and said, Some of them might survive. Both doctors enjoyed the looks of alarm from the students. How many patients do we still have? Dr. Suriella inquired. 2. We discharged Perfect Lane this morning, he replied. Sadly, she asked. And the Sargeart's still here? Dr. Saunders replied, Yes and no change, his voice sharing the same sad tone. After that, Dr. Saunders rose and walked to the door. He looked at the Yogath. Yassel, you feel like taking a walk with me? The Yogath just nodded his assent and opened the door. After all the others filed in, he shut and touched the keypad that secured the door. Dr. Saunders walked backward while explaining to the med students what each compartment was for. There were various forms of treatment rooms. Some just looked like a lounge with chairs and a couch. One had a room with soft walls that he called the rubber room, in case a patient needed a safe spot to lash out. The individual patients' rooms were somewhat Spartan but still pleasant. Sound and video systems let them pick an environment that felt relaxing to them. Dr. Saunders explained, With modern medicine, humanity has managed to eliminate most mental health issues via gene therapy, medical and psychological support. Occasionally, one slips through the system. There are a few mental illnesses that can pop up later in life, so facilities like this allow for diagnosis and the start of treatment. Once they are no longer a danger to self or others, they are sent back to one of our colonies. Gesturing to one of the rooms, being in a combat zone, we mainly get patients of psychic attacks or that need a short time away from the front. Nodding to Dr. Suriella, the good doctor's people have been instrumental in expanding our ability to deal with psych issues that pop up. The Raytheon's psychic abilities have been invaluable in dealing with the effects of psychic warfare. Dr. Suriella spoke up. The humans are naturally resistant to most psionic abilities. This makes them immune to all but the strongest psionic attacks. Dr. Saunders continued, which is a blessing and a curse. It just means the attacks have to be that much more powerful to impact the average human mind. Fortunately for us, any negative impact of those assaults is usually short-term, and we can finish treatment here. One of the med students raised a tentacle. If they are resistant to psionics, then what kind of treatment is used? Dr. Suriella smiled. A very good question. Sometimes they just need time to talk and work through the issue. Others might require more support, either medications or low-level psychic treatments. At this reply, several students raised an appendage. I thought you couldn't use psychic therapy on them. Dr. Suriella, if you remember, I said resistant to most psionic abilities, she explained. But those with minimal intrusion can be used indirectly. She continued, for example, we cannot use our abilities to make them calm or to sleep, but we can project a feeling of calmness in the surrounding environment, such as the feeling of being in a peaceful place like a garden or a religious building. That is what two of our patients are here for. Dr. Saunders replied. He stopped before an open door. Morning, Mike. How did you sleep? The students crowded behind the doctor for a better look. Inside was a human, tall, with pinkish skin, dark hair, and eyes. They were currently inspecting all. The faces in the doorway. I slept pretty good, Doc. Best in a long time. Upon seeing Dr. Suriella, he got a smile on his face. Hey, Doc Suriella, how you been? Hello, Mike. I've been doing pretty good. She tossed her head to indicate the students before continuing. Busy, as always. Do you mind if we discuss your case with these students? They are starting their rotation. Dr. Saunders inquired. The human merely shrugged his shoulders. Sure, Docs. Dr. Saunders began to explain what post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is. He explained what could trigger it and the various symptoms. He nodded to Mike. In Mike's case, he only developed an acute case that has improved over the last few weeks. You feel like sharing with them? It's fine if you're not. Ready. Dr. Suriella said. Mike's eyes took on a faraway look before he replied, I'll give it a shot, Doc. He looked past her and noticed the Yogath standing behind them. Hey, Yasil, want to come stand by me? The Yogath made his way into the room, exchanged a handshake with Mike, and stood behind him. At the look of apprehension on the med students' faces, Mike explained. One of my close battle buddies was a Yogath. He always had my back, so it makes me feel safer when Yasil is near when I talk about it. Mike looked at Dr. Saunders, before asking, censored or uncensored version, Doc? Dr. Suriella answered the question, all of it. They'd better get used to it. Mike started, I'm just a ground pounder, infantry if you've never heard the term, of 325th Legion, Federation Army. We're nothing fancy. We don't get the glory like the flyboys, mech jockeys, or the tin cans. We usually get the crap, end of the stick, but we get it done. We'd been on Balasa Thuri for about 2 weeks, holding the hands of some engineers and techs salvaging a crashed Zith recon ship. Since we were behind our lines and the nearest Zith base was 10 light years away, Command only sent 2 squads. So imagine our surprise when a Zith cruiser jumped out of FTL and landed right in our laps. Our transport ship was a floating wreck before they even knew what hit them. Mike continued, Lucky for us, they wanted their ship and didn't. Just bombard us from orbit. They sent down a pair of dropships, so we pulled back to the wreck, using it for some cover while we sent the engineers and techs deeper into the ship. I don't know how many there were, but they had at least a 2-1 advantage. We skirmished a bit as they approached the ship, but we had to fall back into the ship. A lucky, or I guess unlucky, shot took out the generator that had been powering our lights inside the ship. Have you ever been in a starship without power? It's darker than you can believe. We could have used our wrist light beams, but that just makes us an easier target. So we flipped down our low-light goggles to protect our eyes from any sudden bright flashes and set up an ambush. The goggles can also track our IFF signals and mark friendlies. One of the students raised a paw. What are IFF signals? Oh, right. You probably haven't dealt with them before. IFF means identify friend or foe. It's supposed to keep us from shooting friendlies, but doesn't always work, Mike explained. Where was I? Mike muttered to himself. That's right, in the ship. So we waited until the Zith was climbing through the hull breach we'd been using to access the ship. We could still see them with the limited light, but they didn't know we were there. Our first volley dropped 4 or 5 of them and got another as they charged us. We had to fall back ever deeper into the ship. That's when it got ugly. Neither of us could see, so it was just random firing, grappling with an enemy you couldn't see and barely feel inside our armor. You'd try to stick a knife in one, only to hit the wrong body part, throw a punch or elbow and connect with a wall instead. Mike got quiet, and his eyes looked past everyone until Yassel put a hand on his shoulder, and then Mike shuddered for a second. His eyes focused again, and he took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Dr. Saunders looked at Mike with concern in his eyes. Do we need to stop, Mike? He asked. We lost you for a second. Mike shook his head from side to side. It's okay, Doc, I can finish it. I don't know how long the fighting went on, Mike said, picking up where he left off. It felt like days in that chaos, and then some idiot dropped a grenade, no idea which side did it. The Zith I was fighting took the brunt of the explosion in its back, but it still threw me into a wall. I don't know how long I was out, but the alarm for a suit breach that got my attention. I couldn't even see where it was to patch it. In my panic, I forgot Ballast III had a breathable atmosphere. It was just very thin and cold. It wasn't long after I regained consciousness that lights turned on again, and I saw medics and other troops moving around the ship. Zith and Federation troops were still locked together in death. In some places, the bodies were so jumbled together, you couldn't tell friend or foe. I saw one of the engineers being carried out on another stretcher. I found out later those crazy bastards picked up any kind of weapons they could and joined the fight. They held their ground and died where they stood. Not a single Zith got past them. I still visit that ship in my nightmares. Fighting in the pitch-black darkness, the alarm on my suit, and the gore spattered from floor to ceiling of the corridors. Blood in a half-dozen colors streaked the walls and pooled at the medic's feet as they carried me out. But I've been getting better with their help. I get some sleep now. Nodding his head toward the doctors, Dr. Suriella spoke up. Time to get back to the tour, and turned to walk down the corridor. Dr. Suriella? She turned back to the student who addressed her. You said there were 2? 2? Dr. Suriella replied, not understanding the question. You said there were still 2 patients in the ward and we only saw 1. Another student piped up. Dr. Saunders answered with sadness in his voice. You are correct. There is another here. His name is Sergeant William Danvers, he replied while opening the door and leading them down the corridor. Instead of the door, he led them over to the nurse's station. He gestured to a pair of monitors. The screen showed an older human male sitting in a padded room with no furniture. What was visible of the man's arms were heavily scarred from a lifetime of combat. The man just stared at the wall opposite him, not moving a muscle. Dr. Saunders keyed the mic and spoke into it. How are you doing today, Sergeant Danvers? The man didn't react in any way. If you didn't see the screen displaying his vital signs, you'd think he was dead. Dr. Saunders let go of the button and turned to face the students. He rarely answers. He'll eat and drink if fed. We clean him up as needed. Another student asked, Why is he in the padded room? Is he dangerous? Dr. Saunders chuckled. Sergeant Danvers is one of the most dangerous humans in the military. But right, now this is for his safety. Sometimes the flashbacks are particularly bad and he will reenact the fighting. So it's better for him and the furniture to keep the space bare. So what happened to him? The same student asked. Dr. Saunders replied, Sergeant Danvers and his unit were on Yellen 2, trying to clear the Zith out of the largest city. Urban warfare is particularly dangerous and stressful for our troops. Danger comes from all sides, top and bottom. Even clearing out an area doesn't mean it stays clear. Dr. Saunders continued, Sergeant Danvers' unit was taking fire from several buildings at a crossroads. They cleared the other two and Sergeant Danvers threw a grenade into the second-floor room the Zith was firing from. Sergeant Danvers and a pair of his troopers charged up the stairs and into the room. Dr. Saunders sighed before continuing. The Zith was dead, but so was a Yeleni family, 2 parents and 3 offspring. The Zith had restrained them and left them in a corner of the room. Sergeant Danvers' grenade landed in the middle of the room and killed everyone. Some of his troopers reported he stumbled over to the family, dropped to his knees, and started sobbing while repeatedly saying, I killed kids. He just kept saying it over and over, and then he completely shut down and was sent here. Dr. Suriella spoke up. Something you'll learn about humans is one of their greatest strengths is also one of their biggest weaknesses. Humans have a large capacity for empathy, more so than any other race we've encountered. This ability makes them capable of incredible acts of compassion and bravery. This is why humans are among the best combat medics in the Federation military, and why they make up a large portion of rescue and relief teams. Empathy has driven humans into many conflicts to assist and/or protect the weak. But Sergeant Chiu, Danvers is an example of the other side of it. Sometimes that empathy overwhelms them, sometimes it's just burnout and treated with some rest away from the field. Looking back at the monitor, Dr. Suriella continued. Mike mentioned how he returns to that ship in his nightmares. Sergeant Danvers never leaves his nightmare. War changes everyone, and they return different than they went in. But they still come home and leave the war in the past. Some, like Sergeant Danvers, can never leave the war, but refight it every day of their lives. Non-author's note. Not what I usually write, but I wanted to put this out there. I've friends suffering from both PTSD and PTSI, along with my own experience with an acute case of it after a bad call. It's a hard thing to deal with, and if you know anyone suffering from these, just keep that in mind. Some left a piece of them in that situation and may never be the person before it. To clarify, PTSD is more psychiatric in nature. Sergeant Danvers fits that category. PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, contains a physical component. Mike would fit this category, ETA. For you EVE players, yes, it is that Balas I took the name from, Lito Southern. Sir shared this and I would like to as well. If you are in the US and need help, the National Suicide Hotline is 988. If you are a veteran or know a veteran in crisis in the US, call 877-895-8021 help end the silent pandemic. Thanks for diving into this story with me. Don't miss out on the next one. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a big thumbs up, and drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think.